SATIB webinar on incident management, how to respond in a crisis. You know, incident management in Africa is a little bit of a different kettle of fish to the rest of the world, as we've known. Distance, rural locations, the unreliability of available medical infrastructure adds a layer of complexity to incidents, accidents, and emergencies that one cannot imagine unless you're actually in the middle of it. So when things do go wrong, who do you call? What decisions do you need to make? And who are the best placed people to make them? So I'm pleased to say that I have the incident management experts with me on today's call to unpack this. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to use a real life incident and the actions that were taken to save lives so that you get an understanding of what that sequence of events looked like, how it could apply to your specific scenario, and also reminding yourself of how you actually need to do this properly to reduce your liability, but also to protect your reputation from a media perspective. So helping me today to unpack that is Dewald Cillie from SATIB, as you all know, and Lucien. I think this is our third webinar together, Lucien. I lose count. Yeah. From SATIB 24. So welcome, gentlemen. I'm the thorn amongst the roses today, but I'm still very pleased to have you in the room with me. And if you have any questions for either of our panelists or even for myself with regards to media and how to deal with media during a crisis communications scenario, please feel free to add that in the Q&A folder for me at the bottom of your screen. The chat, as you can see, is open, so feel free to engage with each other there. And if you have your own incident that you'd like some feedback on, please feel free to let us know as well. So I'm going to start with Lucien, because you have seen the back of many an incident in Africa. I know you and I have worked on a few of them together before. Indeed. Indeed we have. But there is one in particular that I know we were discussing a little bit earlier that I'd love for you to unpack. So I'm going to hand over to you, if that's okay.
Okay, cool. So we had an incident. I received a call very early hours of the morning from a lodge in the northern Limpopo area. There was a 76-year-old guest, local South African, who was there, and he had basically gotten out of bed during the night. He had collapsed and hit his head. He then fell back asleep, and he then got up a bit later on again, and he went to the bathroom to go and wipe the blood from his head. He felt dizzy and he collapsed forwards and hit his head a second time on the counter in the bathroom. So they then called the lodge for assistance to come and help. The first aiders arrived on scene, and when they arrived on scene, as literally they walked in the door, he said, "Oh, here we go again," and the guest passed out and lost consciousness for a few seconds and then woke up again, and they put him on the chair. And they were attending to his wounds, and obviously they contacted SATIB 24 looking for assistance, and that's where it basically started. So they called us, the SATIB 24 line got through to the Global Operations Center, who immediately recognized this as a critical medical incident and put it through to us as what we call a hot transfer. So the call was transferred directly through to one of the medical officers on duty, and an assessment began. And the first aiders arrived on scene. They obtained information. We asked a number of questions, obviously trying to ascertain what had happened, why was he dizzy, why did he fall? But what's interesting to note is that the initial call that was made was a call to us to ask simply for an ambulance. That was what was asked. So the question was, please send us an ambulance. And it was a case of, okay, well, can we get more information as to what is actually going on? Because an ambulance is not always the right answer, as Natalia well known in all the webinars I've said. You know, sometimes people don't get it right. And so through digging through everything and figuring things out, we identified that he had a very high blood pressure of 180/105. He had a heart rate of 33 beats a minute, which is incredibly low. If you don't realize that, as an adult, you need to be somewhere between 60 to 80 beats per minute. Some people are a little bit higher. Some people who are very fit are lower, but never lower than 50. If you're lower than 50, you've got problems. So 33 is very low. I mean, think about it. That's one heartbeat every 2 seconds, basically, around about there. And so we realized we were dealing with quite a serious cardiac incident at that stage. That was obviously why he was losing consciousness. He was having what we call arrhythmias, or at least that was one of the assumptions. We then continued doing more assessments, got further history, And yeah, from there, we started managing the case and making decisions. So that's the background of how it started.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to probe a little bit there, if I may. And, you know, the lodge contacted SATIB 24 and said, we think this guy has this problem. So, you know, if we were going to learn from that experience, what would you suggest from an incident management perspective the lodge staff should collect information-wise and give to SATIB 24, as opposed to just making an assumption that what they want is an ambulance? What are the right answers or questions that they should be posing or asking SATIB 24 so that you speed up the process?
Okay, so it's not even really about asking SATIB 24 the question. It's actually about allowing SATIB 24 to ask the question. It's the reverse role. So when something happens, if you look at the definition of an incident is anything that is unplanned and unexpected occurring, okay? And obviously is emergent. So a health problem, you know, somebody, for example, developing diarrhea, believe it or not, that can be an emergency in the end, depending on how far you are. You know, people understand, like if you're in a hotel, let's say the Michelangelo or whatever in Johannesburg, you're around the corner from medical facilities, there's pharmacists down the road. That's not really an unexpected kind of thing. But now you're dealing with somebody in a lodge, in a game reserve, who has diarrhea. You don't have medicine there at the lodge. They're continually going. They're starting to get weak and fatigued. Yeah, now you're starting to get to that stage of dealing with an unexpected, like we're going to hit a problem. There's an element of common sense as to when one needs to access an emergency service or something like that. And if you're ever unsure, the statement we've always said is phone, because that's why the team is there. They will triage the call. They will determine whether it's an emergency or not. And they will tell you if it's an emergency or not. So when you call and you say, look, this is what we're dealing with, we'll say, not an emergency, definitely not a SATIB 24 thing, just contact your local whatever. And that's the end of it. But if it is something that we start digging like this, they say, oh, you know, he's got a wound on the head. Can you get an ambulance to come out so that they can, okay, it's not a wound on the head. Why did he collapse? Why was he dizzy? And we started digging and probing and getting more information. So the key is when you identify there's a first aid problem or any type of incident, get your first responders there and get somebody to contact SATIB 24 and give a brief description of what's going on. What will then happen is SATIB 24 will ask the questions, and then it starts to develop and a picture starts to form. And SATIB 24, most importantly, will give the instructions on what needs to happen, not the other way around.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say better safe than sorry, and actually this is not the time for you to play doctor. You know, if it even smells like it could be a problem, you have to phone SATIB 24. And I guess this is where I'm going to loop Dewald in, because let's just say, for argument's sake, I do feel like I really need to play doctor, and I have not phoned SATIB 24, and I start patching, and I know I'm not supposed to dispense medicine, but hey, it's a panado, so what could go wrong? What happens then from your perspective, from a liability perspective? Are there implications?
Absolutely, Natalia. And there's quite dire implications both for the company and for the individual that dispenses the medication. So our law has changed over the years to such an extent that if you put yourself in a position of a professional or an expert without being one, you could be tried as being that particular expert. But besides from the liability aspect of your company being able or potentially being held liable and having a big reward against your employer or the company, you could personally be held responsible and charged potentially criminally on that particular matter. So I think the importance is to, as Lucien said, whenever you are unsure, you phone the number. Rather be safe than sorry in the end of it.
Yeah, so I mean, I always thought the first thing you do, sorry, Lucien's going to kill me, but I thought the first thing you do is you phone your broker, like your insurance broker. So something goes wrong, I'm just going to phone my insurance broker and they're going to tell me that I must phone this business. But Lucien, you telling me go direct to SATIB 24?
Yes, because if you actually read the policy, if you go and read the policy documents, and all your insurance policies will generally have this, it will tell you in an emergency or for after hours or for whatever, you dial this number, and it will have the SATIB number, the SATIB 24 number there. That's the point of it. Every insurance has got an emergency number of some kind, be it a broker, an underwriter, it doesn't matter, it's there. And those are the people that they want you to call. The broker is not a trained expert in dealing with the problems. And I must admit, this is something that we commonly find. I'm sure Dewald will say that, you know, the SATIB team, I'm going to separate SATIB and SATIB 24 because they're the same, but they're different departments. You know, where you've got the SATIB brokers who are selling the policy and they're doing the financial advisory side of things. They are not experts in emergencies. That's not what they do. They're experts in the understanding the liability behind it, the claims, all of that side, and how to mitigate that risk through that. But exactly as SATIB has done, they know the risks, they understand that, and to mitigate that, they've got a team of experts that they contract to deal with this. And these are the people you phone. We'll know when it needs to go to a broker and when it needs to be dealt with by us. And if it's not something that needs to be dealt with by us, it's a simple claim, then we'll direct it to the broker. But an example different to this one was a case that where a broker, the one of the account executives, received a call to say, hey, like, you know, we've got our vehicle that's been damaged, need to do claims, like, what do we do? And they were kind of like, oh, okay, well, is everybody okay? Like, what happened the next day? And they're like, okay, but, and suddenly it turns out through that process that there were 17 victims on the side of the road, 3 of them dead, the rest of them in a remote hospital in, like, you know, some foreign country, barely anything happening. And that ended up in our medical team suddenly pulling in all the resources. We had 4 helicopters that we had to utilize to evacuate 4 critical patients. We had multiple other patients loaded into ambulances and split all over the show. At the end of that, through the whole chaos of it, there was a husband and a wife that had been separated, which we didn't realize because she was flown out of the helicopter. We then had to do an interprovincial transfer. It was a nightmare. The point is that the initial call started to the account executive asking basically for, hey, how do we claim for towing? And it turned into a mass incident that went ongoing for 2.5 weeks before everybody, you know, and
Sure.
getting mortal remains on. So the point is that if they had called, you know, initially and start dealing with it, you always phone the emergency number. You always start there if it's something that you don't know, and they will advise. That's why it's there. It's called an incident management service for a reason. You manage incidents, unplanned, unusual things.
Can I just ask then, in terms of the responsibility of product owners in that incident management process, if you will, pre-incident happening, your suggestion, Lucien, for them to, yes, of course, they're going to phone SATIB 24, but they need to have a crisis management plan or something in place so that when something does happen, at least that stopgap is in place while they're getting, you know, the SATIB 24 response. What advice would you give a lodge, a hotel, a guest house to make sure that they're ready for an incident of any unexpected form?
So there's quite a comprehensive document actually that SATIB in fact has. They've put together for their clients, and it's the starter pack that they give. And in that pack, it includes everything. It explains what an incident is, how to know what an incident is, how to identify it. It explains the whole theory and philosophy behind incident management processes, the principles of it, how to form an incident management team on the ground, how to work with the incident management center, what the different people's roles and responsibilities should be. It includes templates to explain the steps and the processes, you know, checklists to do. It's a lot of things that are there. But the point is that pack has been put together, and it's been done through the years of the SATIB 24 product that has existed. It was a very, I'd say, quite a founding and pioneering document actually for the African context of incident management. I will admit I was not part of the founding team that put that together. I have subsequently worked on that document together. So it's a comprehensive document, but to get it, one would have to be with SATIB is the point. So yes, that's the thing. Yeah,
Okay,
but
so
it does involve a lot of planning, and it involves a
yeah.
lot of knowledge and a lot of training that you need to get, and a lot of information, which is difficult to obtain in all the different sources everywhere.
Yeah, and just from a reputation management perspective, it astounds me how many companies don't actually have a crisis communications plan in place. And if they do have one, it's somewhere in SharePoint gathering dust and no one has actually figured out. And then when the thing actually happens and you've got media coming to you and saying, please, mister, can you explain what's happened? You're actually on the back foot. You're trying to deal with the crisis, but at the same time, you have this threat to your reputation. And you don't have time to deal with media because you're trying to deal with the crisis essentially. So that having that crisis communications plan upfront, and there's a great template that we can share with you just so that it's trained into your teams is really, I think, I'm a communications person, so I'm going to say it, a very important part of your incident management. Okay. Lucien, take us through the next step. Okay, so you guys arrived and you discovered all is not well in La La Land. Tell us.
Okay, so we got all the history, we got the basic stuff. Look, as I stand, very high blood pressure, very low pulse, something was going on. 76 years old, high blood pressure, history of high blood pressure, diabetes, and heart problems. You combine all of that together. Basically what ended up happening was we came up with what we call a differential diagnosis. A differential diagnosis is in essence a diagnosis which cannot be confirmed yet with tests, but it is the theories of what we have. So when you go to a doctor or anything, they're going to ask you a whole series of questions. It's like an algorithm, like a mind map that they're going through. And you get to an eventual point where you reach the end of your mind maps and you need to do something else, such as comprehensive testing. So the differential diagnosis that we came up was that he was having a bleeding stroke in the brain, cardiac arrhythmias, that's where the heart rhythm is completely whacked out. Something called orthostatic blood pressure, which is where if you stand up very quickly, your blood pressure drops and you pass out, and then your blood pressure normalizes. Severe dehydration, very common thing that occurs from not being familiar with the heat and the environment. Or a head injury with a subdural bleed because of the initial slip and fall, because we don't know why he initially fell. So those are the differentials, which are all very serious conditions. And at which point we said, right, he needs an urgent evacuation and proper assessment. That was the outcome. And the next steps were to put together a plan to get him out. That was the point. We wanted to get him out. So initially we contacted an ambulance company that is nearby, to load and transfer. The plan was always to get the person transferred to Pretoria, which is the nearest most comprehensive city, should we call a metropole area, to where they were located. And unfortunately, the local ambulance nearby where it was unavailable. They were busy with another patient, and they are the only ambulance provider in that particular town. So it was a case of, all right, well, now we need to go somewhere else. So we went to the next neighboring town. They didn't have an ambulance either available. The point is there were no ground ambulances available within the immediate area. So the only option that we had was to obtain, to contact an ambulance service in north of Pretoria. So that was that. Sorry, I'm just going to close the door quickly because I'm having, I don't know, they're doing something with dust. Give me 2 seconds.
No problem. Sure. Sounds like quite a khajunta, hey, getting ambulances. And I think that's the thing. When this kind of thing happens, it's always in an area that is off the beaten track, or, if it were easy, then you probably wouldn't need an incident management service. It's for all the complicated stuff that you do need an incident management service. If you do want to have a copy of that document that Lucien was talking about, please feel free to send Dewald an email. He's been kind enough to share his email address in the chat, dewald@satib.coza. What, you're going to get inundated now, Dewald. You've opened a can of worms. Lucien,
you should rather direct them to the account executive. Oh, shame. But yeah, so basically there were no ground ambulances available in the 3 neighboring towns. So we then decided, right, let's go to Pretoria. We contacted Pretoria. They were not prepared to respond due to the distance, because it would take over 2.5 hours for them to reach the particular location. So at that point, the next thing we decided to do was to look at a helicopter from Johannesburg. We've got a number of helicopter providers that are based there. So we put them we had already initially put them all on standby, so they were already looking at flight plans, but we now phoned them and said, look, this is definitely going to go ahead. We need now to know. So they did weather checks, they did all of those fabulous things. And most importantly, and this is a process that most people don't understand, is they also needed to do a check with the medical aid fund to get authorization to fly. Because the point is that there needs to be that in place for the patient. So they did that investigation, and the medical aid declined the flight. They would not fly. And I'll tell you why that is, and it's a very common thing that occurs in South Africa. Medical aids will not authorize a flight unless there is already a medical person on the scene with the patient that has assessed the person. They don't send a helicopter off without a medical assessment being done. So the point is that there was no medical assessments done on scene by a practitioner, and so they declined it, stating that they don't view this as a a valid case yet, because they need more information. And that's where SATIB stepped in as the SATIB 24 product, and they authorized the cost. In fact, it was Dewald himself that authorized the cost with me. So I phoned him up at the crack of dawn and I said, so sorry to wake you. We need authorization for 85,000 Rand right now. And it was authorized, which I might add is above the normal SATIB limits. But the fact is SATIB went above and beyond, as they do always with their clients. And that's important to note. So the authorization was given and we activated the helicopter. They flew out, landed at the lodge immediately, and at that point, obviously, they took over care. He was indeed found to have extreme cardiac arrhythmias. He was given treatment, advanced life support treatment, medications to stabilize his heart rhythm. And yeah, we then tried to arrange for him to go to Flora Clinic, which is a hospital in the west of Johannesburg, the Wild West, as that other lady said. His cardiologist was not available, not working that day at that hospital, and the hospital also didn't have any ICU beds available, so he was not able to go there. So we then arranged for the secondary option, which would be Unitas Hospital in Pretoria. They accepted, so it was cool. They accepted, cardiologist accepted, helicopter took off, was now heading there. And I'll stop there so that we can go there, and then because there were more problems after this. Yeah.
Jeez, so between Dewald is Father Christmas because he signed off on the very big expense, and you, Lucien, you just attracting all the difficulty and having to deal with very, very strange cases. But I think that's the thing, and it's never simple, because if it was simple, you wouldn't need somebody to step in and help you from an incident management perspective. Now, we had an interesting question from Isabel, and I was wondering it myself when you were talking. She talks about one serious emergency that she was involved in, which was in South Luangwa in Zambia, and where the Guests International Insurance and then SATIB, who actually makes those final decisions, the Medivac plane from South Africa or from Germany. So if you've got both of those scenarios, who actually makes the decisions? Because you want to be singing off the same hymn sheet, I would assume. We don't always, sadly, I will state that, we don't always sing off the same hymn sheet. Remember, travel insurers are funders. Their main responsibility is to provide funding and to pay for their financial product and a financial element. The biggest problem that I find with the travel insurers is that most of the time they don't understand the concept or the peculiarities of Africa and what is occurring there. So that's a problem. The second thing is that they don't always make the decisions in the best interest of the patient. They quite often make decisions in the best interest of the fund, the actual policy itself. And so that's where SATIB 24 is very important, because we balance it between, our responsibility is to look at the client's liability, so the policyholder's liability, and also to act in the best interest of the patient. Because if we don't do what's in the best interest of the patient, ultimately we're responsible in a negative way. So to answer your question simply as to who's responsible for it, it depends on where the patient is at that stage and what we've done. If we have said, right, our plan is to move a person to this particular hospital to be stabilized and then moved on from there, because we know that that hospital is not equipped to deal with the problem,
then we are still liable and we are still responsible for it because we've taken the patient somewhere that isn't really comprehensive, and then from there we're moving. When the travel insurer steps into the picture and they take over and they can start making the decisions, is when they turn around and they tell us one of two things. One, they say to us, we are the funders that have the duty of care of this person, step down, at which point we tell the patient, do you want us to continue helping you or do you want your insurance to take over? The patient will then make the decision, not us. The second, where the insurer takes over, is when our plan has reached its end, the person is at the destination that we wanted them to be at, so at the comprehensive facility, the most appropriate facility, and then we hand over the reins. So about 50% of the time, the insurers go with our plan and we pass the baton to them when we're ready to do so, and they're happy with that. And then sometimes it's a tug of war between liabilities, but that's our problem to deal with, not the clients.
Yeah. Dewald, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so I mean, as Lucien said, and I'm sure that everyone can understand, is medical emergency is an extremely complex animal to deal with. There are so many moving parts, so many loose ends, so many different entities, companies, individuals involved in order to get a solution for a single individual or a single incident. So what the purpose of SATIB 24 is not there to step in and take over from a travel insurance policy or take over from a medical aid in the end of the day. So the purpose of SATIB 24 is we have realized that golden hour, that critical hour, we need to maximize every single second within that hour. Now, the problem is that if an incident happens and there is you don't have someone that is slightly removed from the incident, that is not part of the traumatic trauma at that stage, to understand that to phone an ambulance or to phone a hospital, to phone a helicopter, it's the first question that service providing company will ask you is, who's going to pay for this? So where do we get the money from in order to get your guest from your property to the medical facility? So, and that is the goal of SATIB 24, and what we want to do, what we are doing through Lucien and SPS, is to make sure we get the individual as quick and as fast as possible to the medical facility so that they can start receiving treatment. At that point is where medical aids and travel insurers start becoming a discussion point with it. Now, as you may know, and as Lucien will attest, I mean, not everyone in the world do business in English, and we don't all have the same time zone that we are dealing in. So when it may be absolute noon in South Africa, but we are phoning a travel insurer halfway around the world that doesn't speak English, that we need to converse with in order to try and get a guarantee in order to get the patient into the medical facility. So it's extremely complex. Now, sometimes, or more often than not, I would say, is these medical facilities or companies or funds, they're starting to know who we are. And they know who SPS is, and the specialist company that we use to do all the incident management for. So they know who we are. So these transfers start becoming a bit easier, but you still do get the 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever the number is of these funds that wants to take absolute control of the entire situation, as Lucien said. And by the point when we get someone in the emergency room, the question that the travel insurer or the medical aid asks is, well, how did you get them there? Give us a report. But there hasn't been time to put reports together. We are trying to save a life. We're trying to get someone to medical attention as quick as possible. So these are the intricacies when it comes to all these things. So, and again, I mean, like Lucien said, I mean, these incidents don't keep office hours, unfortunately. I mean, how often I get woken up by Lucien at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning asking for guarantee of payments to be sent to hospitals because we cannot get hold of the travel insurance. We can't get hold of the medical aid or their call center or whomever it is, but we need to get the patient to medical care. And that is where the benefit comes in. So it's that absolute golden hour that we speak about, that we want to maximize every single second at the end of the day. But that's only when the incident happens. Now, there's an indefinite time before an incident happens. So, and that is where the preparedness comes in. So it's no use you try and start scratching around for telephone numbers, for the number for SATIB 24 when something happens, when you need it. It should be all over your administrative office. It should be at your front desk. It should be in your game viewing vehicle, in your first aid kit. It should be everywhere. Your guides, your staff, your night staff, your HODs, everyone should know that number by heart. Because as I've said, incidents don't carry or keep to office hours. And it could be 2 o'clock in the evening. And the first person that gets or notified of the incident could be the night receptionist. She needs to know what to do. And that is where the most of the information is being gathered from in any event by Lucien and his team, is the person that is in contact first. Because whether they know it or not, there are subtle information that they actually take in, that Lucien and his team are an expert in to actually get from that individual at the end of the day. So that preparedness is absolutely critical to any preparedness for potential incidents.
Thanks, Dewald. And just before I hand over to Lucien, I'll testify to that, because we had an incident very recently where the team, the staff, did not have SATIB 24's number, and in fact didn't know what SATIB 24 did. And it could have alleviated so much had everybody in the team known that that was SATIB 24's number and that was SATIB 24's role. Lucien, over to you.
Yeah, so I raised my hand because Dewald said about the telephone number being in the reception. I'd actually go a step further, and I can tell you that telephone number should even be next to the guest's bed on the telephone in the room. Because you'll be surprised how sometimes the landlines and things go down in rooms and they need then their cell phone and they can't get hold of anyone. We've had a number of incidences where guests in guest houses or B&Bs or wherever it might be have called us directly as like SATIB 24 directly, because they can't get hold of somebody at the guest house and they have no idea what to do. And we've managed it and dealt with it, and we've then gone into the records and we've looked up the clients and we then find out this and that, and eventually we get hold of like a shareholder or somebody who then finds alternative numbers. But we've dealt with the incident in the background nonetheless. So we've in essence stepped in for the property, if you will, for the client, and have acted in their best interest to obviously manage it. So the number should literally, as Dewald says, be everywhere. It should basically be next to every single phone within your organization, and obviously on your phones, including the WhatsApp number, I might say.
Yeah, Dewald?
Yeah, Lucien, you forget about the call that you received from the lady asking where her dentures were. That you're asking you.
Oh God, yeah. It was interesting. Oh, shame. But yeah, so okay. So basically, we had the helicopter, as you said. That was the last part, heading now towards Pretoria. And there were all those intricacies that had been dealt with and the complexities. I mean, you must remember at this stage, we've had 4 ambulance companies involved. We've had a cardiologist, the Flora Clinic, ICU, 4 helicopter companies. So, I mean, that's now where we're at so far, and we're not even at the end yet, you know. So now the helicopter had taken off and they were heading towards Unitas. And suddenly we received a call from Unitas. Oh, actually, so sorry, we can't accept the patient. We've just admitted a heart attack patient, and he's now taken the last bed. So, and that's it. Thank you, bye, and phoned out. So that's that. You know, the helicopter's in the sky, it's flying towards Pretoria, then we have no hospital for the person to go to. So alas, we then very quickly scrambled and we got the person then moved to Sunninghill Hospital, which is another cardiac facility. Now, it's important to state this because you must remember you can't go to any hospital. Because some hospitals don't have the cardiac facilities. For example, if you fly to, I don't know, let's say Linksfield, you're going to have an issue there because they have no cath lab there. They have no cardiologist. Well, they do actually have a cardiologist, but they don't have a cath lab there, okay? If you've got a traumatic incident, because you've, I don't know, had a car accident and you've got a broken bone or whatever it is. You can't go to Rosebank Clinic, for example, because they don't have an orthopedic surgeon. They don't have a 24 hours theatre. They don't have any of that. You need to go to Milpark. Each hospital has got very specific needs, very specific services that they offer. Some of them do offer services and should in fact be avoided because either the surgeon is inexperienced or they've got bad history there. The fact is that every hospital has its unique, experts, excellence centers, and we know that. And so we know which ones to go to and which ones not to. Hence why we then went to Sunninghill, because they are a very, very good cardiology facility, as is Olivedale, as is Milpark. And so that's why we utilize that, as well as Morningside. Sorry. So there's those. We arranged another cardiologist and another ICU bed. And yeah, luckily that was the end of that. He was admitted, the helicopter landed, he was taken straight through into the cath lab and by the cardiologist, and they did procedures to stabilize his heart rate. And yeah, he was in ICU for about 3 days and then recovered fully, very luckily.
Wow, what a story. Sure.
Yeah, it was good fun. And all of that occurred in the time space of an hour and a half.
No, you're lying. An hour and a half?
Hour and a half, 90 minutes.
Oh, that is incredible.
Yeah.
So what happens if, so one of the questions we had is, does SATIB 24 only kick in South Africa, or is it, can you call on SATIB 24 to help you elsewhere? And then my second part to that question is, what if you're in like Durangon? Like I was in Sierra Leone in June last year. Would SATIB 24 come and rescue me? No.
Well, yeah. So Natalia, so that becomes an underwriting question in the end of the day. So SATIB 24 in essence is a service designed for South Africa. However, so SATIB 24 consists of two components. One component is the incident management side of things, and the second component is the insurance component of it. So the insurance component allows for evacuation costs to be picked up, public relations costs to be picked up, all these types of things. Now, throughout Africa, the incident management portion of SATIB 24 is available to all SATIB clients regardless of what territory they find themselves in. However, the insurance component, so in South Africa, it is all inclusive in your product that you buy from SATIB. In Africa, you have to buy an additional evacuation policy in order to cover the cost. And the rationale behind that is in South Africa, we know a standard evacuation is roughly between, a road ambulance is roughly between, call it 10 and 30,000 rand, depending on how far you are. And an air evac is probably anywhere between 75 and 150,000 rand, depending on where you are, depending on the day. I mean, obviously it can differ from there. So, however, in Africa, the cost of evacuating is substantially more, and for that you need a specific policy where you actually buy the rights to a more expensive evacuation facility. So, and also to remember, I mean, evacuation in Africa is far more complex than what it is in South Africa. You're dealing with different border patrol crossings. You're dealing with different governments, different rules, different. It's really, really an absolute nightmare. I mean, Lucien, you'll remember when we did that evac from northern Mozambique. I mean, after many hours, probably half a day of getting the patient from where the incident happened through rain and mud and what have you. We eventually got him to the tarmac, got the individual on the plane, and as we wanted to lift off, all airspace have been shut down because the president closed the airspace in that particular area. All of a sudden, our emergency changed from getting the patient to a hospital to try and find batteries in that remote area by way of by vehicles, to get batteries to the aircraft in order so we can have the medical equipment running to keep the patient alive until at that point where we can get the aircraft in the air when the president stopped flying in a particular area. So it's really, really, really a difficult scenario when you're trying to get guests from cross-border territories back into South Africa and to hospitals here. So yeah, so we will respond. The management, the incident management side of things will take place, but you need to have an additional insurance component to your cross-border activities.
Yeah, and your broker can advise. I mean, if you are in a very isolated area, what that would look like. Okay. Also, just want
absolutely.
To mention,
so I mean,
yeah.
so sorry, Natalia. So just to be clear, so the SATIB 24 South African component is all inclusive. There's no additional cost for you. So that is why we're saying it's a South African product. So that's why we're talking about it. But it's not really. It is cross-border. But if you do go cross-border, you just need to buy the additional evacuation policy for your guests.
And I also just wanted to mention, because we've been talking a lot about medical and, people being evac'd and all the rest of it, but I've been involved in SATIB 24 incidents where there was no health issue. SATIB 24 doesn't just kick in when, there's somebody that's been injured and they need to be evacuated, or I've seen like spider bites before. I had an incident with a vehicle and wildlife, and I mean, so it's not just about health, correct? Who wants to take that, Dewald?
Sorry, Natalia, I was busy typing. Would you just quickly?
We're both ignoring you.
Yeah, was it something I
Dewald,
said?
it
was because I said Sierra Leone, and can you please come and rescue me?
I'm trying to answer Alistair on the chat.
Okay,
sorry.
So it's not just about evacuating people and medical emergencies. As I said, I mean, I've seen incidents around spider bites, for example. I've seen other things that have got nothing to do with medical emergencies. So maybe if you can just give us an understanding of the ambit of SATIB 24, that would be helpful.
Am I able to share my screen or not at all?
I reckon, yeah, you can. I've allowed sharing, so go for it.
Okay, I'm just going to put this onto, because this is an actual SATIB 24 thing I'm going to show you, that we were showing somebody this morning, actually. Dewald, you know the page that has all the different types of incidences that I'm talking about?
Dewald's still responding to Alistair. He's kind of
respond to Alistair. How do I
ignoring
share?
us.
Okay.
I mean, Natalia, while Lucien is looking, so yes, we deal with a whole array of calls coming through. So it could be from non-life-threatening incidents through to life-threatening incidents. I mean, we get calls ranging from guests that have actually left their heart medication in the States, and now all of a sudden they sit with a potential problem. So what we then do is we get hold of our doctors to get hold of their doctors, so we can actually write the prescription in South Africa, get it on a vehicle that is designed to have the medication delivered and get it to the guest wherever they may be in the African territory, just to avoid any escalated incidents that could possibly take place as a result of someone not taking their heart medication. So it's a wide range of calls that we do get. So, I mean, the second part of SATIB 24, and the end of the day, is for us there to manage and mitigate future potential claims against the company or against the policy. So, and that's also a very important component. As part of your requirements of your policy wording is you need to ensure that you try and minimize the losses against the policy as far as you can. So by having an incident management system like this, professionals take it over. So when it gets to the stage eventually or potentially where you have to defend yourself in a court of law, this will go a long way to show that your negligence is not as big or as onerous as what your guest legal team may hold against you. So that's the second part of this is the full reporting afterwards to say that your duty of care has been taken all the way through to a hospital. You've actually employed the services of professionals to assist you in getting the best help to this patient, and to try and mitigate the negligence or proportional negligence.
Gotcha. Thanks, Lucien, for adding that. Actually, we can send that out when we send the recording of the webinar out as well. I think we will have access to it somewhere. Okay, so you can carry on responding to Alistair Dewald if you'd like, or you can tell us Alistair's response, or at least your response to Alistair's question, which was about Poppy and it needing to be acknowledged. But is there any sense in preloading guests' info pre-travel? Too much to manage or potential future thing to do? Dewald?
So again, Alistair and the rest of the listeners, it's all about being prepared. The more information you have at your fingertips when an incident happens, the smoother the flow of the management will take place. So it is extremely difficult to try and gather personal information from a spouse that is panicking or is in a traumatic state whilst we've got SATIB 24 on the line, trying to ask the wife for personal information, could be at hand, could not be at hand. I mean, for us that has been through traumatic incidents, is the most of us, our brains just go to absolute mush, and you can't even remember your second name. So Alistair, the more information you have beforehand, it's more efficient the incident will flow. So I understand that you are concerned about papaya, but you know the Poppy Act is there to guide us into safeguarding the information. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are not allowed to use the information that we are gathering. So, and remember, SPS, SATIB 24 and SATIB, we've got absolute strict NDAs and laws that are governing us in terms of this information.
I just want to point out something there in terms of the Poppy Act. You must remember that actually the Poppy Act specifically makes provision for medical funders and for medical aids and so forth. Medical aid doesn't require permission, they don't require consent from the patient to obtain information to pay for things. Any type of medical funding, they're allowed to receive the information. It doesn't require consent. So the fact is, you sharing as a lodge, sharing information with us in terms of the identity and so forth of the person to be able to successfully facilitate the medical payments and things like that, there is no need for the consent there. However, where your concern is with Poppy in terms of obtaining the information, incredibly valuable to have it. Please do have it. There's so much information that is needed. When we phone a travel insurance to activate, they want the flight itinerary. So i.e., when did the person start their trip? When did they end their trip? They want to know that. They want the copy of the passport. They want to know the home address, the zip code, the date of birth. This is literally the process they put us through when we are trying to activate a policy, because they have to do security verifications on their end. So they want to know the address, the zip codes, the telephone numbers, the date of birth, the passport numbers, all of these things. And then in terms of validating the policy, they want to know when did the person start their trip and when do they end their trip and which flight. They specifically want to know the flight number, and they want to know the booking reference, because they go and they actually check it. They don't just take the information at first hand. So to have that information is incredibly valuable, especially when we're dealing with cross-border evacuations, to have that right there and then. Travel insurance, in terms of obtaining that information, we often get that information probably, I'd say, about 20, 25 minutes after an incident has started. That's how long it takes people to gather it and to find it, because let's be honest, you buy a travel insurance and it sits in your email inbox, and now they have to go and connect to the Wi-Fi and dig through the emails and try and find it. So imagine a SATIB 24 didn't exist and there wasn't funding. We'd be sitting there waiting for this information before we can activate anything. That's where the problems come in. That's that golden hour that Dewald was talking about. But yeah, obtain information. But the problem with it is that you just need to make sure, and this is where your prep comes in, that you've got proper cyber insurance, your cyber security, which SATIB will help you with. You've got the security measures in place from a digital perspective to safeguard that information, and then you're fine. You know, if you've got those things there, then you really have no reason to be fearful of having information. Poppy is not a new thing. It's new for South Africans. It's not new from a global perspective in terms of privacy of information, GDPR. everybody's aware of GDPR. They've all had to deal with it, you know, with the guests that are coming in, with the inbound travel agents, and that it's not complicated. Just because we've got a poppy, it makes it sound scary, but it really isn't. Just take a deep breath and go through it, and you'll see it's fine.
Deep breath, deep breath. Just off the back of that, Alistair was saying that he was thinking that even more that SATIB could have infrastructure for us as policyholders to preload with SATIB 24. We will always have the info at hand, but as you say, it's really stressful when it happens and your lizard brain kicks in. So it would be great if SATIB 24 actually had that info ahead of schedule. Johannes asked around cell phone reception. So he says most of his tours are in remote areas without cell phone reception. I have a Spotix sat phone with an international emergency function, and I can send SMS messages. Can SATIB 24 be contacted by SMS? And is the SMS number also on that information pack?
Ooh. I'm going to step in and say that I'm going to have to check the SMS functionality of that phone. I'm not 100% certain. I think it does receive SMS, but we'll check and make sure.
Okay, Lucien, it is a cell phone line, so it should take SMSs on that particular facility.
Yeah, I'm certain it does. I'm certain it does, because the WhatsApp is obviously there. It's monitored 24 hours a day, obviously. The normal telephone number is obviously there. Skype is there. All of that is there. You can also, you know, the sat phone thing. I mean, we've dealt with a number of incidences over sat phone in the past. So there shouldn't be a reason why not, but I'd rather just be 100% certain.
Yeah. Check it for us, and then we can make sure that when we're reporting back on the webinar for everybody that you've got that.
Can I pull this off the screen, Natalie?
Yes, yeah, you can, no problem. We've got two interesting questions in the chat. Angelique, that's a really great question. Should a staff member or guests phone in, do they need to have the company policy number? Would they be assisted without it?
Yeah, they would be assisted without.
They would be assisted without.
So Natalia, no. So you don't need a policy number. Our system is set up in such a way that the property name is recorded on the system. A search is done on the system, and through those avenues we manage to find the property that we're busy dealing with. So we also do understand that some camps, some businesses are part of a bigger scheme. So when the phone call is being made, it's probably useful to give as much information of the company or the organogram of the business that you are part of in order for us to find the policy on the system. So in saying that is if we can't find it on the system at that point, we then contact all the brokers within SATIB. We ask them whether they recognize the name. If there is still no recognitions, we will still continue with assisting and handling the incident until we find the right answer at the end of the day. So obviously a policy number would help, but I mean, your policy number effectively changes every single year at renewal. So you're going to have that document updated. It's not a document that you'll be able to put up there and keep for an indefinite amount of time. So I probably would just say, look, the higher you can go in terms of to be a part of a group, for example, let's call it whoever the more group, whoever it may be, that's at that level when you do make the phone call to put it through.
Bronwyn's question, what is the update surrounding COVID compliance and policy insurance for COVID patients?
Sorry,
what is the update surrounding COVID compliance and policy/insurance for COVID patients?
In terms of SATIB or
no insurance? Yeah. No, so there's still no insurance. So any infectious disease will no longer be covered on any insurance policy into the future. The insurers still haven't recovered from what happened in the past, and I don't think anyone has recovered. But at this stage, there is no insurance cover for a pandemic of any nature.
I was going to say, we haven't recovered after 2 years of that. So, you know, they haven't recovered, we haven't recovered. Simon? Yes,
To just
Lucien?
say something about the insurance there, I think it is important though just to point out that there are some travel insurers. There's quite a number of travel insurers that have made provision and are taking, obviously providing coverage for COVID, but under very, very strict caveats that are in place. So it's important, I think, for, maybe lodges or wherever it might be, to stipulate that, when they say you must have a travel insurance to say there, please ensure COVID, inclusion. Because what you do land up happening often is a guest will be stuck at a lodge, let's say they need to check out now and they need to do their PCR test because they're catching a flight tonight to Johannesburg. So from Johannesburg to, I don't know, back to, Europe or whatever. And suddenly their PCR test is actually positive. They're asymptomatic. There's nothing wrong with them, but they are now positive. And what do? They're at the lodge. You can't kick them out because they need to isolate. You can't send them there. And that's where that guest's insurance is pretty important because it will pay for the additional nights that the person has to stay. Whereas if it's not there and the guest doesn't have the money because they've budgeted, they've been saving for 3, 4, 5 years of their lifetime for this trip, what do? So I think it's point that out to people.
Yeah, and really that's what happened to me in Sierra Leone. I was forced into isolation for 3 weeks in a hotel and not allowed to leave it. So without travel insurance, you have to foot the bill for it. So word to the wise, and it's expensive when you're in Africa for sure. Last question, because it is 2 minutes to 4. Geez, it's just flown. Is from Simon, and that is around PR management with regards to incidents. So, Dewald, the question is to you, and it is, do you offer assistance with this aspect?
I'll quickly pass that one back to you, Natalia, because as you know, we use you for all our incident PR related issues. So, but that's the only one component to it is the communication. The second component to PR is the legal side of things. So it's one thing in how you communicate, and it's another thing in whether you communicate correctly without prejudicing your policy conditions. So and that's where it is very, very important that at a point of an incident, so between Lucien and myself and whomever else is involved, we will quickly identify whether the incident requires the assistance of a media expert only at first, or would it also then require the assistance of a legal expert together with the media communications expert? So that's usually how these things go. And we will scramble from our side. We will start scrambling the likes of Natalia and our legal brains that we have that's as suppliers to SATIB. And we will be in communication with you and the staff on the property and the gym, and we will guide you in what to say, when to say it, what not to say, and then obviously take that further into the media. So when the media do come knocking on your door, that should be passed on to us as a team, and we will make sure that we get the response to the particular media company in the manner that it's supposed to be dealt with.
Yeah, and we have had occasions where we haven't needed to pull legal in, but we have similarly had occasions where we've had to pull legal in because of the liability perspective. And we've had some suppliers' products go out to media without having checked what it is that they're saying and actually just causing more of an issue. So that's again why you have a crisis communication plan in place. You have one spokesperson and you are dealing with the legal advice and the media advice to make sure that you don't cause additional liability for yourself. It is 1 minute past 4. We're over time. I'm really sorry, but my thanks both to Lucien and Dewald for joining us. Dewald, all the way from Ora Tambo, with all those great announcements in the background. Really appreciate it. And to all of you who joined us on a Thursday afternoon, stay safe and make sure that you have that SATIB 24 number saved on your phone, on your desk, and all your staff know about it. Please, please, please. This is very important. Thank you guys for joining us. It was always a pleasure to have you, and we will chat soon. Cheers, everyone. Bye.